Hey guys, as we're winding up the semester, there's just a few more topics that I wanted to make sure and cover with you. We're going to break into chapter 12. I'm only going to be doing certain sections of chapter 12 though. So if you're reading along in the book, you don't have to read the whole thing, although it is a pretty good read. We're only going to be doing certain sections, and I think that's going to be 12.1, 12.3, 12.5, 12.6, and 12.7, according to my notes. So so let's just jump into it. Um, there's a couple of things that you may need to know before we dive into this stuff from some of the chapters that we didn't hit. There is a difference between intra-specific competition or interactions and inter-specific interactions. And these inter-specific interactions take place between two different species. So interspecific interactions would be like a species. You guys probably remember from lecture, I always reference squirrels this semester for some reason, but it would be like between a species of squirrels and a species of goats, all competing for the same acorns or what have you. That would be interspecific. Intraspecific is an interaction that happens within one species. So intraspecific would be one species of squirrel all competing on the same hill for the same acorns. Okay, this is one species. Intra is one species. Inter is two species. We also have this idea of the competitive exclusion principle, which I'm probably going to be referencing in one of the later videos. I just want you guys to see it from the top. The competitive exclusion principle, in its essence, states that if there are two species who are competing for the exact same resources, they have the exact same niche, as we're going to talk about later, that only one of those species can survive. All right, so the competitive exclusion principle, if you have two species competing for the same resources in the same area, only one of those species can actually survive. So we're talking about species interactions um, between these different species or among these different species, okay? So different species interact in a number of different ways within a habitat. There's lots of different ways that things can interact with one another. We're going to talk about the resource requirements that species of plants have in common because that's how they're principally going to be competing with one another. We're going to talk about interactions briefly between animal and plant species, and we're going to talk about the interactions among different animal species. Okay, and remember, for the most part, we're going to be talking about right now inter-specific interactions. Inter-specific interactions. So, oh, and we're also going to categorize. Okay, so most plants use the same resources, right? For the most part, they need water, light, carbon dioxide, other essential nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, and they do compete for these things fairly intensely. And now, how do you think plants are competing with one another? Think about that for a second. How do plants actually compete with one another? Because they're not like walking around. So they're 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 getting bigger leaves, they're getting deeper root systems, right? Sometimes they're just crowding the other plants out by growing faster or growing stronger than them. And acquisition of resources by individuals of one species reduces the amount that's available for the other species. And that should make some sense to you. If you go into uh, if you're a plant growing in a field and you grab all of the resources there, there's not going to be any resources left over for anybody else to grow, anybody else to use. Heterotrophs have a broad range of potential species interactions I'm sorry, I kind of jumped the gun pretty rapidly there. We went from talking about how plants can compete with one another to how plants can interact with other species. So plants can be eaten by different things. Okay, plants can compete for resources again, like I was just discussing. They can outgrow, crowd other things out. They can get big leaves. They can get deep roots, get all the water, get all the nutrients. Um, Things can also use other organisms as a habitat, such as a parasitic fungus. Um, I actually saw this just the other day. Oh no, here it is. I was out taking a walk and I saw this leaf. I'll put pictures up, but I saw this leaf and I noticed that the underside of it was orange, very, very orange. And what this is a fungus that is growing on the bottom side of that plant. So that's an example of parasitism, one of the interactions we're gonna talk about. So species interactions affect population dynamics. Obviously, if you're not able to grow somewhere, you're not going to be able to give birth, right? You're not going to be able to reproduce. Okay. These interactions between species are going to affect the survival and reproduction of individuals. Okay. And as we're going to talk about in a couple of sections, these interactions are agents of natural selection. Okay. Which obviously is a very important thing for evolution. So on to 12.1, species interactions can be classified based on their reciprocal effects. What are the possible types of interactions among individuals of two different species? So again, that is interspecific, right? Interspecific with an ER. And how can these interactions be classified? So the effects on one species can either be positive, detrimental, or neutral, having no effect. Okay, I'm sure there are many gradations in between, but we're kind of painting with broad strokes right now. This is something very commonly done in biology, is just giving them a plus, a minus, or a zero. So there are categories of relationships. There is a neutral relationship, which is a 0-0, which means meh, you don't really care. The other organism being there doesn't really have an impact on you one way or another. It doesn't make a difference to you. Then we have mutualisms. Okay, mutualisms are positive positive, so both species are interacting. So this is plus plus. This means this is one species gets a plus, the other species gets a plus. Okay, both species are interacting. Both species are benefiting from this. A great example of this is those fish that swim near sharks, and the fish are cleaning off the parasites from the sharks, so the fish get like a meal out of it, and they get sort of a safe place to be, and the sharks get to have those parasites cleaned off of them. So that would be a great example of a mutualism. Plus, plus. Then we have a commensalism. Okay, a commensalism is when one species benefits and the other is meh. The other doesn't care. It doesn't matter to the other species at all. Okay, so that would be plus and then a zero. Plus and then a zero. Example, orchid growing on a tree limb, that's a fine example. The sort of textbook example that I usually see is cattle egrets. They hang out near these large mammals, maybe they're yaks or whatever they are. But these big mammals, maybe water buffalo. Just picture a cow in a field. The cow's going through eating the grass, and when it eats the grass, it's as it's moving through causes insects to fly into the air, and the cattle egrets wind up eating those insects. And it doesn't affect the cattle at all. The cattle, it is sort of immaterial to them. It makes no difference whatsoever. But the egrets benefit from it. They get a big plus sign, and the cows have a big zero because, whatever, you ate some insects. What difference does it make to me? That is a commensalism. There's your orchid growing on a tree. Forgot I had a picture of that. It's in the textbook too. Okay, competition. This one should be fairly intuitive. You should probably already know what competition is. Competition is detrimental to both species, both populations. Okay, and economists, I've had students argue with me on this one before, but in the animal kingdom or in the realm of biology, at least, competition is a minus minus. Okay, if you're competing with another organism in order to get resources, you are going to do worse as a result. You are automatically going to get less resources. Okay, competition minus minus. I'm not going to give an example. I'm sure you guys can come up with your own examples of competition. A few more here. There's predation, which is where one species feeds on another and kills it. You guys know about predation. This would be a hawk eating a snake, or cows eating grass, or a coyote eating a rabbit. It's predation, one thing eating another. Then we have parasitism, which is one species feeding on another, reducing its fitness, but not killing it. And I think I'm going to make this a discussion question to give some good examples of the differences between parasitism and parasitoidism. Because in parasitoidism, one species uses another for reproduction, and its larvae feed on it, eventually killing it. So the most like metal example of this is a large wasp called a tarantula hawk. And so you can't use this one for the discussion, obviously, but the tarantula hawk finds tarantulas. These things are about, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches long. They are jet black with these very vibrant red wings, super cool looking. And they cruise around and they find tarantulas and they sting them and lay their eggs inside of them. And eventually, when those eggs hatch, the larvae eat their way out of the tarantula from the inside out. Kind of gnarly. So I'm going to show a little table that gives a summary of these interactions, and I've covered one up because I don't care about it. You can look it up in the book if you want to know. Neutral, 0, 0, both species don't care. Mutualism, plus, plus, both species benefit. Okay, that's the shark and those little feeder fish. Commensalism, plus 0, one species thinks it's great, the other doesn't care at all. The example I gave was cattle egrets. Competition, both species are detrimenting as a result of this. Okay, a species of goat competing with a species of squirrel for the same resources, or two plants competing for the same area on a hill. Okay, predation, one species benefits to the other species detriment. Okay, and really what that means though is one species kills another species so that it can eat it, so that it can survive. Then you have parasitism, which is plus minus, one species benefits, the other detriments. And you have parasitoidism, which again, one species benefits and the other detriments. And I'm going to have a discussion question about parasitism and parasitoidism that'll be online shortly here. So the next section is 12.3, and we are over time. So I'll see you in the next video.